If Esther wanted to know whether or not God had placed her for that purpose, there was really only one way to find out. Take the risk. Step into the moment. Yes, it was risky, but doing nothing was risky too. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. Mordecai's words fell flat. Esther essentially says only somebody with a death wish would be willing to do that. You see, in the Persian Empire, nobody just strolled into the king's inner court uninvited, not even the queen. This was not an open-door policy. It was high security. And there was one law: enter uninvited and you die, unless the king happens to extend his golden scepter. Now that sounds really extreme, doesn't it? But honestly, it's not entirely foreign to us. I mean, imagine walking into the Oval Office unexpected, just thinking the president's going to be happy to have a chat with you. I mean, you'd be stopped before you ever get close, maybe even worse. So from a governmental perspective, we can at least understand the policy. But on a relational level, between the king and his queen, this was harsh. Esther, by this point, unfortunately, she wasn't being treated like a queen. By the way, men today, treat your wife, treat your mom like a queen today. It's a good day to do that. She was more like a forgotten member of the harem. She says, I haven't even been summoned for 30 days. So she felt distant, discarded, powerless. Her message to Mordecai was basically this: I can't just walk in there. And if I do and he's having a bad day, I could die. And don't forget what happened to Queen Vashti. She was banished in a heartbeat. What makes me any different? You can feel the anxiety creeping in, the fear, the second guessing. She was asked to be doing something courageous, but it was just too risky. What if this? What if that? Sometimes life puts us in that place. God, in his providence, allows his people to face situations where the last thing we want to do is to step up, to stand out, to speak up, or to do what's right. But he calls us to those moments anyway. Why? Because it's in those moments that he grows us, and he shapes us, and he prepares us, and he uses us for his purposes. At this point, Esther needed help. She needed a faithful voice to speak courage into her fearful heart, and that is exactly where Mordecai steps in. Let's read verses 12 through 14. And they told Mordecai what Esther had said. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Mordecai gives her 3 compelling reasons to act, reminding her that God's purpose is greater than her fear. Reason number 1, living in the palace will not save you. Mordecai says in verse 13, don't think that just because you're in the palace, you'll escape. Esther was a Jew, just like the rest of her people. And if a death sentence was hanging on every Jew, that meant it was hanging on her as well. Now, this, again, it may not be the central point of the passage, but it brings up a powerful spiritual principle. No one is exempt from the judgment of God. Not even the highest, wealthiest, or most powerful person on earth. Esther had status. She had luxury, but none of that could protect her from death. The same is true for us. No matter your status financially, physically, politically, socially, none of it can save you from the judgment that we all deserve because of sin. The only way to escape the eternal death sentence is through faith in Jesus Christ. Salvation comes not by status, but by grace through faith. So Mordecai gave her first reason to speak up. Living in the palace will not save you. Then he provided her with another reason. Reason number 2, God will accomplish his plan with or without you, but keeping silent will cost you. In verse 14, for if you keep silent at this time, relief will rise for the Jews, but you and your father's house will perish. Mordecai believed in the sovereign God of Israel. He knew God's promises. He may have had Jeremiah 29:11 on his mind. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for welfare, not for evil, to give you a future and hope. He trusted that God would somehow preserve his people because God doesn't break his promises. But Mordecai knew something else. If Esther stayed silent, she would miss her opportunity to be part of what God was doing, and she would likely forfeit her life and legacy. God will fulfill his purposes with or without you. He doesn't need you. He's God. But in his grace, he wants to use you. And if you let fear silence you, you're not just playing it safe. You're stepping away from the very thing that God may have created you to do. Would you rather die having never taken a risk for God, or die having been used by him for something that mattered eternally? Living in the palace was not going to save her. God would accomplish his plan with or without her, but keeping silent was going to cost her. Then he gave her reason number 3. Maybe God put you here for this exact moment. Mordecai closes with a question, and that question still echoes today. And who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? In other words, Esther, maybe this is the very reason God put you here. Maybe all your pain, all your past, all your positioning, it was never about you and your comfort. It was about God and his desire to use you for his purposes. If Esther wanted to know whether or not God had placed her for that purpose, there was really only one way to find out. Take the risk. Step into the moment. Yes, it was risky. But doing nothing was risky too. Because one path led to silence and regret and death. While the other, it was dangerous, but it could save lives. Mordecai confronted Esther's fear with purpose. And that's exactly what we need when fear tries to paralyze us. When you feel afraid, remember your purpose. God is in the business of placing people exactly where he wants them, not for their comfort, but to make an eternal impact. And if you've ever thought, I'm not good enough, just remember, no one on this side of heaven is. Jesus has never worked with perfect people because there aren't any. But that's the beauty of God's grace. God delights in using flawed, everyday people to accomplish his purposes. He can use ordinary people to do extraordinary things. The Apostle Paul tells us that God chooses the weak things of this world to shame the strong, the foolish to shame the wise. So don't count yourself out. God wants to work through you, not around you.